If you're trying to decide between Andersonville and Uptown in Chicago, these two neighborhoods are close enough that a lot of buyers consider both, but living in them can feel completely different. Your commute can be completely different. The type of home you buy can be completely different. What you have within a few blocks of your front door is different. And in Uptown especially, moving just a few blocks can completely change the experience. There's also one pocket in Uptown that a lot of relocating buyers overlook, and if you're torn between these two neighborhoods, it's one you'll definitely want to know about. So I'm going to break down what it's actually like to live in Andersonville versus Uptown, what your budget buys, transportation, the lake, housing, parking, and the everyday things you don't really think about until you live here. And by the end of the day, you should have a pretty good idea which one actually fits you better. And in case we haven't met, I'm Dee Savage. I lived in Chicago for 27 years and I've been selling homes here for the last 24 years. I specialize in helping busy professionals just like you move to Chicago or within Chicago. So let's get into it. When buyers are deciding between Andersonville and Uptown, I usually start with one question. What matters most in your everyday life? Because once you actually live here, things like how close you're to the train, whether you use the lake regularly, what your immediate block feels like, and where you go every day for your errands are going to matter a lot more than what looked good during a weekend visit. And that's where these two neighborhoods start to feel very different. A lot of everyday life in Andersonville revolves around Clark Street. You got coffee shops, bakeries, restaurants, home stores, specialty markets, tons of independent businesses all along one very walkable stretch. Depending on where you live, you could go out for brunch, grab groceries, stop at a bookstore, and meet someone for dinner without ever needing to move your car. But Andersonville isn't just Clark Street. Once you get off Clark, you're surrounded by residential blocks with a mix of vintage 2 flats and 3 flats, courtyard buildings, greystones, condos, single-family homes, and a lot of these streets feel surprisingly quiet considering how close you are to all that activity. And then on the east side of Andersonville, you also have Lakewood Balmoral, which is one of the neighborhood's most beautiful historic pockets. You'll find larger historic homes, gorgeous architecture, mature trees, and really beautiful residential streets. And that's part of what people love about living here. You can have all that activity along Clark Street and then walk a few blocks and feel very removed from it. Uptown is laid down very differently. Instead of having so much centered around one main commercial street, Uptown has several areas that each have their own feel. And that's why when someone tells me they want Uptown, I need to know which part they're talking about. At the south end, you have Buena Park. There are quiet, tree-lined residential streets, vintage condos, courtyard buildings, and some really remarkable historic homes. And this is also where you find the Hutchinson Street Historic District, one of those streets that really surprises people who know Uptown from Broadway or the Lakefront. You have wider lots, large 4-square style homes, beautiful greystones, and some seriously impressive historic architecture. Some of these homes are huge with big front porches, deep setbacks, mature trees, and a completely different feel from what you probably picture when you hear Uptown. And you're still super close to the lake, the Red Line, restaurants, and everything happening along Broadway. So that's a really good example of why I keep saying you can't judge Uptown as one neighborhood. You can just go a few blocks and the experience completely changes. Then around Broadway and Lawrence, you have the Uptown Entertainment District. This is where you find the Argyle Ballroom, the Riviera Theater, and the Green Mill. There's more foot traffic here, more nightlife, and definitely more of that big city feeling. Farther north, you have the Argyle area, known for its Vietnamese and Southeast Asian restaurants, bakeries, and markets. It has its own energy and cultural identity. And closer to the lake, you'll find a mix of vintage buildings and larger condo buildings with really easy access to the lakefront. And then there's Sheridan Park between Clark and Broadway. This is the pocket that I promised you at the beginning. Sheridan Park has beautiful residential streets, vintage brick buildings, courtyard condos, and easy access to both Clark Street and the Red Line. So if you're drawn to Andersonville but want better train access or a wider range of prices to choose from, Sheridan Park is definitely worth looking at. And this is where the exact block really matters in Uptown. Living near Argyle is not the same as living in Buena Park. Living close to one of the entertainment venues is not the same as living on a residential block in Sheridan Park. Even the noise and foot traffic at night can be completely different. So don't just tour the property. See the block during the day and come back again in the evening. Now let's get into the homes themselves, because this is where the comparison starts to get really interesting. Andersonville is predominantly low-rise, so you're going to see vintage walk-ups, 2 flats, 3 flats, greystones, courtyard buildings, single-family homes, and some newer boutique condo developments. What you're generally not going to find are full amenity high-rise buildings. So if you need an elevator or door staff, attached garage parking, a pool, or lake view, Andersonville is not going to be for you. Uptown gives you far more variety. In Sheridan Park or Buena Park, you can still find vintage 3 flats, 6 flat, and courtyard buildings, but move east towards Marine Drive and Sheridan Road, and you're looking at a completely different type of housing. You have mid-century and modern high-rises that have elevators, door staff, fitness rooms, pools, on-site management, attached garages, lake views, and this is where something happens that catches a lot of people off guard. The condo with a lower price tag isn't necessarily the one that's going to cost you less money every month. Whenever I am comparing condos with a buyer, there are 3 things that I want to look at together: the purchase price, the total monthly assessment, and exactly what an assessment includes, and the financial health of the association, including reserves, recent projects, and any major work that may be coming. You can find a lakefront condo in an uptown with a surprisingly attractive price. And then you open the listing details and see a pretty substantial monthly assessment. But that doesn't automatically make it a bad deal. That assessment can include heat, air conditioning, cable, internet, door staff, building amenities. So you have to look at what you're actually getting for that money. A $900 assessment that includes several things that you would otherwise be paying for separately is not the same as a $900 assessment that covers very little. Now compare that with a vintage 6-unit building in Andersonville or Sheridan Park, and you probably don't have elevator, you don't have door staff, you don't have pool for sure, or on-site management, so your monthly assessment can be a lot lower. But lower assessments do not automatically mean that a building is healthier. Let's say you have 6 units and the building suddenly needs a roof for $30,000. And if there isn't enough money in reserves, each owner could be responsible for about $5,000. Now take a 200-unit high-rise. Costs are spread among a lot more owners, but the projects can also be bigger. Elevator modernization, facade work, plumbing risers, windows, concrete restoration, these projects can cost millions of dollars. So neither type of building is automatically safer. What I really want to know is whether the association has been planning and saving for the work that building is eventually going to need. And that's why I look at the budget, reserves, meeting minutes, special assessment history, recent capital projects, insurance information, and any planned work. You're not going to learn any of that from the price you see on a real estate website or a listing sheet. And before somebody says, okay, I'll just pick the building with a low HOA fee, be careful with that too. A building that keeps assessments artificially low and puts off maintenance can end up costing you a lot more than a building that charges what it actually needs and takes care of the property. Now, let's put some actual numbers around this. For an updated 2-bedroom, 2-bath condo in Andersonville, you're currently looking somewhere from the mid-400s to 600s. Newer construction, elevator access, larger floor plans, and higher-end finishes can push that higher. Uptown has a much wider range. You can find some high-rise 2-bedrooms starting in the 300s, while renovated vintage condos in Sheridan Park or Buena Park can be in the 400s and 500s or higher, depending on a property. 3-bedroom condos are harder to find in Andersonville. When a good 3-bedroom comes up, especially with parking and an outdoor space, you could be looking from easily $600,000 well into $800,000, even $900,000. Uptown generally gives you more 3-bedroom options and a more variety in a building type, I mean, it's generally a significantly larger area than Andersonville. You can see options from the 500,000s into 700,000s and beyond. Single-family homes are expensive in both neighborhoods. In Andersonville, they can start well above 1.2 million, and renovated homes can go beyond 2 million. Uptown also has some exceptional historic homes, including the ones we talked about around Hutchinson Street, and those can also command premium prices too. There's one more expense that buyers leave out all the time, and that's parking. In Andersonville's vintage buildings, attached garage parking is limited. You can find outdoor deeded spaces, you can find tandem parking or detached garage spaces, and sometimes you're just getting a street parking. So when a condo does include a secure garage parking or just a secure space, that obviously can carry a noticeable premium. In Uptown, a lot of larger buildings closer to a lake have attached garages, but there's also a lot of them that don't. But don't just assume that garage parking is included if you see it on the listing. You still need to know, is the parking space owned or is it leased? Also, it can be deeded or sold separately, or do you have to lease it from the building? If it's deeded and can be sold separately, it can also have its own monthly assessment and taxes, and depending on the building and the current market, it can cost another $25,000 to $40,000 or more. If you drive every day, you need to find all of this before you fall in love with a condo. Know the cost, know the monthly fee, guest parking situation, permit rules, and winter restrictions. And now let's talk about something far less exciting than parking, but something that you're going to use a lot more often: groceries. In Andersonville, you have Jewel on Clark Street, Edgewater Produce right across the street, Middle East Bakery and Foster, and smaller specialty markets nearby. So depending on where you live, you can get a lot of your everyday errands done without getting very far. Uptown gives you a little bit different mix. You also have larger stores like Mariano's on Sheridan and Jewel on Broadway, but then around Argyle and Broadway, you have specialty Asian grocers where you find ingredients and products you're just not going to find in a regular supermarket. Now let's talk about dining. Andersonville's dining and nightlife are mostly concentrated along Clark Street. You have places like Hope Leaf, Little Bad Wolf, Lost Larson, and tons of other independent restaurants, cafes, and shops. Uptown gives you something very different culturally. The Aragon, the Riviera, Green Mill give you a live entertainment scene that Andersonville just does not have at the same scale. And Argyle adds another layer with its restaurants, bakeries, markets, and annual Lunar New Year celebrations. So this really comes down to what you actually use. For someone who loves having independent restaurants, cafes, and shops centered along one walkable street, Andersonville has a lot going for it. Uptown gives you more variety in the type of entertainment and nightlife around you, and it's more spread out. And another thing is that Uptown is directly on Lake Michigan, so depending on where you live, you can be within a really easy reach of Montrose Beach, the Lakefront Trail, and the famous Montrose Dog Beach. If you run, bike, sail, play volleyball, have a dog that loves the beach, or you just want to walk by the water a few times a week, that is hard to beat. Andersonville is also close to the lake, but it's not a lakefront neighborhood. If you're trying to decide between these two neighborhoods and you want someone to sit down with you and compare the actual homes, buildings, inventory, and what they're really going to cost you every month, that is exactly what I do. My contact information is below. I work directly with my clients. I'm not going to hand you off to someone. And these are the kinds of decisions that I help people make every single day. And if you're moving somewhere outside of Chicago, I also have a network of agents around the country, and I'm always happy to connect you with the right one. Now, if you're commuting downtown by train, Uptown usually gives you the easier CTA option. The Red Line runs 24 hours, and Uptown is served by Wilson, Lawrence, and Argyle just reopened as completely rebuilt accessible stations in July of 2025. And depending on where you live, you can also have express bus options along Lakeshore Drive. Andersonville is a little bit more address specific. From some homes, the walk east to the Red Line is totally reasonable. And from others, especially if you're a little bit farther west. That walk can get old pretty quickly in February when it gets cold or when you're carrying groceries. But there's another option a lot of relocating buyers don't think about, and that's the Ravenswood Metro station on the Union Pacific North Line. That train takes you into Oldville Transportation Center, and depending on a train schedule, where you're starting from and where your office is downtown, it can actually be a great commute, especially if you work on the west side of the loop. But don't decide this based on a generic commute estimate online. Actually test it. Walk from the property to the station at a time that you would normally leave for work. Factor in the wait, any transfer, and the walk on the other end. Because 10 extra minutes on paper can feel very different when you're actually doing it 5 days a week. Even if you don't have kids right now, school boundaries are worth paying attention to if you're planning to own a home for 5 or 7 or 10 years. And CPS attendance boundaries in Chicago are address specific. 2 properties just a few blocks apart can be assigned to a completely different neighborhood schools. Around Andersonville, you would be associated with schools like Pierce, and in Uptown, depending on the address, you could be in Brennanman or McCutcheon. Disney Magnet School is also nearby. It has a different admission structure, so living close to Disney doesn't necessarily mean that you're guaranteed admission, because this is a selective enrollment school. So always check the exact address through the CPS school locator and confirm the current admission rules directly with the CPS. I'm also going to drop a link in the description for CPS School Finder, so don't rely on whatever school happens to be shown on a real estate website. And even if schools aren't a part of your own plan, they can still affect the future buyer pool when you eventually sell, so it's important information to have. So after everything we've talked about, there are 3 things I really don't want you to do. First, don't assume Andersonville is automatically the more affordable choice or more expensive choice. Inventory can be tight, and that can push prices up. Second, don't compare Andersonville with Uptown without narrowing down which part of Uptown you're actually considering. The exact pocket and block matter. And third, never compare condos based on a list price alone. So, Andersonville or Uptown? If I had to simplify this, if Clark Street, locally owned businesses, and low-rise vintage housing sound more like you and the way you want to live, I would definitely start with Andersonville. But if the lake and easier red line access and having more types of homes to choose from matter more to you, then I would start with Uptown. And if you're sitting there thinking you actually want a little bit of both, that's exactly why I told you to remember Sheridan Park. That could be your sweet spot. What actually matters the most is which neighborhood works for your actual life, your weekday commute, what you really want to spend every month, and whether you're going to use the lake 3 times a week or 3 times a year, or you'd rather walk out of your door and be close to Clark Street. So those are the things that are going to matter long after the excitement of moving into a new place wears off. If this comparison helped, tell me in the comments which way you're leaning, Andersonville or Uptown, and what's driving your decision. And if you're planning a move to Chicago, reach out. My contact info is on the screen and in the description. I'd love to help you figure out which neighborhood and which home actually fit the way you want to live. Subscribe for more honest Chicago neighborhood comparisons. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.